Alright, so the first thing I want to talk to y'all about today is art and how it's evolved and been with us and like what we've used it for since we've been on this planet. Well, first it's been around since like we've been in caves, and with the cave art, and it's come with us all the way through, the first civilizations to ancient Greece, England, then to like today with internet artists and stuff like that and graffiti artists. For a majority of human history, art was used to create a visual representation of the world. Well, a one to one version of it, you know? Like they wanted to get as close to reality as possible. For example, like a lot of people would paint landscapes. They would like travel far from home, paint the landscape, come home, and show people. Because a lot of the people who see these paintings and love these paintings are never going to be able to like see those landscapes. So that was like a large part of art back then. It was creating a one to one version of the world to spread and share beauty. That was its purpose. Or memorializing somebody. People used portraits to signify importance in the same way that same way that people use statues. Over time, art kind of morphed into something else. It's still a lot of it is still about, creating like a one-to-one aspect, that's still a big part of it, but it's morphed and changed into a medium for us to express emotions and feelings that we don't particularly understand. One of the first like big artists to benefit off of this, well, he didn't really benefit because he died before people really cared about it, but Vincent van Gogh was one of the first to like really get big off of it. And his art didn't really care about being a one-to-one rendition of the world. It was more about expressing the emotions he had or somebody would have while being in that world. Like he used the painting, he used like the paint and the colors and the shapes that he drew to mimic the emotions. The further we travel as a society, the more emotion comes to the foreground in art. And one pretty big example of this in like modern times is my favorite artist, Basquiat. One of his quotes is that he sees painting as more of a way to express certain ideas rather than creating a one-to-one version of the world. And this is a really interesting take. And this is how he rose to fame. And his drawings are far, far from one-to-one versions of the world. His art style is mostly something, it looks like something a kid would have drawn, right? And that was intentional because he would look at the stuff kids would draw and he'd say he liked it more than the stuff in museums and like what quote unquote real artists were drawing. This way of painting and seeing art really changed the way that people valued and saw art, you know? Because the way we judged the beauty of an art piece was by how realistic it looked. But with him, it was more about what type of ideas could he put into the painting or drawing or anything? He was a lot more focused on expressing an idea rather than mimicking the world. Every brushstroke to him had a meaning, and he would scribble words in like the background and then cross them out to. Sometimes he didn't want you to focus on them, and sometimes he crossed them out so that you would focus on them, and not being able to see them would, appeal to your human nature to want to read it. And, speaking of children, government is a lot like a child in the sense that, and I mean like a small child, like the type of, like around the age where spanking them on the butt or slapping them on the wrist or giving them a little pinch is like a valid form of punishment, you know? Well, a lot of kids don't listen to warnings because they don't see why they should listen until something bad happens to them. For example, a lot of kids may be in the kitchen while their parents are cooking and they say, hey, don't touch the stove, don't touch the pot, don't touch the fire, you're going to hurt yourself. Kids hear that and ignore it, and they don't see why they shouldn't touch it, and they don't understand how it could hurt them. And eventually, they go on and they touch it. They burn themselves, and now they know, oh, I shouldn't have touched it, and they aren't going to touch it anymore. Or you tell a kid, stop running around in the house, stop running around in the house, stop running around in the house, and you tell them this, they ignore you. Eventually, they break something, and then right when they break it, you spank them, and now they know, one, running around the house might lead to me breaking something, and if I break something, my parents are going to be upset, and I'm going to get hit. So they stop doing that. Eventually, they grow out of this stage, and spanking them doesn't really have an effect anymore, and they know better, right? Governments act in a very similar fashion. They don't listen to warnings like peaceful protests, right? They are the people telling the government that they are fed up and they are demanding change, right? The government hears this and they ignore it or even demonize them, like when Colin Kaepernick peacefully and respectfully knelt for the national anthem. He felt as though that was the best way to go about it. He even asked a veteran what would be a respectful way to protest, and that was the veteran's suggestion. But our president condemned him and demonized him and made him out to be an enemy and twisted his message about trying to spread awareness for police brutality against marginalized people, specifically black men. The president twisted his message into disrespect for the army and the military, and he turned it into a fight against either you he turned it into a situation where either you are for Black Lives Matter or you hate the military, which is not at all a position that Colin Kaepernick wanted to spread, but that's what was forced upon him and how kneeling was viewed because of the words of the president. And that's one example of the government ignoring peaceful protests. A more powerful example is Martin Luther King Jr. marching and spending his whole activist career, well, in like the main in the spotlight. The main, while he was, famous for act, he spent that whole portion of his life protesting Jim Crow era laws, and segregation in this country. He spent his whole life for the abolishment of those laws. And every once in a while he would get like a win here and there, like a small one. Like the bus boycott. Uh, that was a real big one. And little ones here and there. But his ultimate goal was to enact federal and national change, which he never saw in his lifetime. But one day he was murdered, assassinated. This angered the public to such an extent that the country was under insane riots for over a week. The worst riots the country's ever seen, and almost all the major cities, just horrible, horrible riots. Shortly after, the Civil Rights Bill, the Civil Rights Act, was passed. So my point is that the people of this country have a power, and that power is their ability to riot. Rioting in of itself is a bad thing that the government should try to stop. And the only non-tyrannical way to stop that would be to listen to peaceful protests and at the very least give them the opportunity to make their points heard. Because that is how you prevent anger from building up throughout the country. What do I know? I'm just a guy in a closet.